Well, this is a long-awaited reactionary review. I've been teasing this one for quite a while. So I think at one point, most of us, if we didn't think this was the best anime of all time, we thought that this anime was just awesome, that it was amazing, that it was one of the greats, that this is what anime can and should be. I think most people loved Hellsing at one point. And in a way, I think most of us still do. But Hellsing is a prime example of what's known as fridge logic. What fridge logic is you can't sleep or you wake up in the middle of the night. You need a glass of milk. You need a piece of cheese. You need a bit of food, and you go down and you open the fridge, and then suddenly something occurs to you, and you're like, "Oh, well, that didn't really make a lot of sense. Why did that even happen?" And that's kind of the case with Helsing. I mean, it seems really cool. It's over the top. The aesthetics are amazing, but when you start to really think about it, it kind of starts unraveling, and it just leaves a lot of you going, "Why did they do that? What was the purpose of that? Did the creator of this know what the hell he was doing?" Or did the creator of this know what the hell sing he was Okay, I'm sorry, that's not even a pun. But yeah, so Helsing represents the ultimate victory of style over substance. The substance in this series is lacking to a large extent, and everything follows what they call on TV tropes the rule of cool. The rule of cool is it doesn't matter if it makes sense. It doesn't matter if it's practical or logical. If it's cool, it's what you have to do. And to a large extent, that's what Hellsing is. A lot of the stuff in the series doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's just kind of there because it looks cool. And I think something to keep in mind is the guy who made Hellsing was a hentai writer prior to making Hellsing. And I think you can probably see that a lot in just how he does character designs, how his focus is largely on kind of visceral. I'm trying to think of how to put it. Visceral. I don't know. Sensual's not the right term, but he's just very focused on kind of the image and a focus on kind of characters or anything else is very much a secondary. So let's get into what I think are kind of the goods and bads of this series and kind of really break it down and analyze it. So I think the biggest single issue with Hellsing is Alucard, and I did a character profile of him a while ago, as it's kind of one of my semi-older ones. I probably should think about redoing it at some point. But basically, Alucard kind of undermines the series to a large extent. Now, why is that? The issue with Alucard is he's so much stronger and overpowered compared to everything else in the series that it completely evaporates all tension. And I've had people say, well, Argent, that's his character. And that may be his character, and he may be living up to his character, but that doesn't make it a good character, and that doesn't make it a good decision on the side of the author. I mean, you have things like John Wick, where it's deliberately played up. Like the fact that John Wick is basically invincible, nothing can kill him, nothing can even touch him, is kind of a joke. It's played for laughs that he's this all powerful person, and that's okay. And Health is saying it's played completely straight. No one in the series, with the possible exception of Paladin Anderson after he takes the nail of Helena, provides even a moderate challenge to Alucard. They basically just die in one hit, or they try to kill him and he just regenerates. He's basically completely invincible. He basically he can teleport. He can regenerate pretty much instantly from any wound. He can be like shot into pieces and he'll get back together. So to start off with, he's immune to pretty much any form of physical attack. Like when he's fighting the Dandy Man or Alhambra just cuts him into pieces, but he's okay. Luke Valentine shoots him a bunch of times. He falls apart. He's okay. Walter repeatedly slices him into dozens, like thousands of pieces. It all has absolutely no effect on him whatsoever. And that's kind of a problem. If you're going to have kind of the main protagonist be completely invincible and incapable of being defeated, it destroys all tension in the series. The only other character I think who really could have stood up to Alucard and maybe given him a good fight was the captain, and he died in a plot, like in a contrived plot device. And the only other person who could stand up to him, Paladin Anderson, also died in a contrived plot device. Paladin Anderson was about to beat Alucard, and then Sarah shows up and disrupts him, and Alucard just kills him in one shot anyways. And that's kind of like at the core of the big issue. You have this big threatening organization. You have Millennium. It's this all-powerful, amazing, like, super Nazi battalion, and they have all these, like, special vampires, like Rip Van Winkle, Soren Blitz. Who else is there? Alhambra, the captain, and you have all these people, and they all just suck. Alucard just one-shots them all, and it's just bullshit. So you have that, and once you kind of accept that Alucard is that powerful, the rest of the series rapidly starts to kind of fall apart. One wonders, why does Hellsing even exist? Alucard can teleport, he's immune to damage, and he can one-shot everything that moves. Why would they even have soldiers? What is the purpose of having soldiers when all they're just so much weaker than Alucard? The only real purpose of having Hellsing soldiers is for them to get killed. Alucard could literally just take on everybody by himself. As shown near the end, he could take on pretty much the entire last battalion by himself. He was capable of taking into himself the entire, like, the souls of, like, millions of people who died in London. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. It's a complete, I don't know how else to say it, that it just completely undermines any sort of tension in the series. It just makes the whole series into Alucard just killing everything in his path and everyone else just trying to get out of the way. And you gotta wonder what the logic behind it was. Because Abraham Van Helsing defeated him in battle and then spent decades turning him into the ultimate undead. Why did he do this? Why did he create someone who's completely invincible and, if ever freed, would basically destroy the world? Now, we don't know exactly how the controls on Alucard work. I forget if it's actually described on screen. I'm not sure if it works, like, if he gets, like, if the last Hellsing dies, if it puts him back to sleep, if it kills him, or if he's freed. But if it was designed to free him when the last Hellsing dies, then Abraham Van Helsing basically just, like, okay, so, like, one of the Helsings, like, their parents could have died of AIDS or whatever, like Integra's parent did, and then Integra could have just fallen down the stairs and died, and then Alucard would be free to basically blow the world up. I mean, families have been wiped out before. Not even because they died in battle, just, like, from car crashes. Like, General George fought dozens and dozens of enemies, dozens and dozens of battles and got shot at by planes and stuff. But ultimately, he just died in a stupid car accident. So you really got to wonder, what was the what was the idea behind that? And that kind of brings us to the second major problem with this series, which is Integra. Integra is a profoundly unlikable character, to be perfectly honest. I know probably a lot of people like her. She's a strong, empowered woman, but she's super boring. Her character is basically that she's blonde and the boss. It's hard to even describe her. Basically, she just sits around, smokes and drinks, and tells Alucard to go kill people. And that's pretty much her character. It's not really interesting. It's not really compelling. It's just boring. And like I said, she has very questionable judgment. Despite being the heir to Britain's only chance of defeating the undead and controlling the most powerful vampire on Earth, who's the only one who can defeat super weapons like Incognito, she doesn't bother to have children. Even if she was unwilling to, I guess, kind of reproduce the natural way, she probably could have gotten artificially inseminated. She could have gotten artificially inseminated. She could have had a surrogate child. She could have had like one of her eggs removed and then a surrogate mother have one. There's all kind of things that she could have done and basically remained a virgin. But for whatever reason, she wasn't interested in it. And now she's past her childbearing years by the end of Hellsing. And when she dies, Alucard's presumably going to go free and basically destroy the world. So she's a woman who is so engaged in her duty that she didn't have children when the most important part of her duty is having children. I don't get it. So that's problem number 2, is her character doesn't really make a lot of sense. Then we have Ceres, who's also another boring character. Her personality is she's kind of hesitant to be a vampire, maybe, and she has big boobs, and she likes that asshole French guy. And that's about it. That's her personality. It's just kind of another boring, kind of lame, uninteresting person. And this is, like I said, this is kind of the ongoing issue with these series, that all the characters are just kind of look cool. They do cool stuff, but with the exception of Paladin Anderson and the Major, they don't really have much of what you'd consider a personality. So that's kind of like the main characters, and that's kind of, I think, my biggest issue. So let's get into the plot, because the plot also doesn't make a huge amount of sense, to be perfectly honest. So maybe let's talk about it a bit. So Hellsing starts off with Ceres Victoria being turned into a vampire by Alucard immediately after she gets killed. So that's okay. That's kind of an interesting way to start the series. But immediately after you do that, after that happens, they go into kind of the final plot. Now, the whole Millennium thing doesn't really feel like a main plot, because it all almost immediately goes into rising action. Normally in a dramatic story, there's kind of like the introduction, there's the rising action, and then there's kind of the climax. And in Hellsing, the climax is like 2/3 of the series. Like the first part is like 1 or 2 episodes or 1 or 2 volumes with Ceres being there. And then I think the next incident is the Valentine brothers, who are made by the Nazis. And then immediately after that, they're like, oh, we know who's behind it all. There's no suspense. These guys called Millennium are behind it. We're going to send Alucard to South America. He's going to go get Millennium. So you're just like, okay, so we're told who the main villain is, like 2 volumes in, and we're already starting to build towards the climax. And like I said, the climax is like 2/3 of the series. So like Alucard and Ceres go to Brazil, and they fight Alhambra there. And then immediately after that, it like turns out that, oh my god, the Nazis are going to attack Britain. We got to get back. And then they like send Alucard to go and take down the carrier, which contradicts what previously happened. Because previously, like, vampires can't cross water unless they're in their coffins. But Alucard can cross water on an aircraft carrier, I guess, if the plot states that he has to cross it on an aircraft carrier. Okay, that makes sense to me. So yeah, so like 4 volumes in, or 4 or 5 volumes out of like 13, immediately what happens is the Major shows up, he announces his master plan, and they attack London. And the attack on London is the entire rest of the series. We have like a series of battles that are supposed to be dramatic but have absolutely no tension because Alucard's a boring, overpowered asshole. So all that stuff basically just yeah, I don't really know what to even say about it, to be honest. So I've mentioned Millennium, so let's talk about that shit. So the main villains in this series are Millennium, aka the Last Battalion, aka I think they're like called Organization 666 or some generic bullshit like that. So they were a group of Nazis commissioned by Adolf Hitler himself to study the occult, of course, and try to contribute to the Nazi war effort. So it's kind of like Raiders of the Lost Ark. They want to get the magical powers so that they can take down the Jews and all enemies of the Reich. So what winds up happening is during World War II, Alucard and young Walter go and basically wipe the whole thing out. And kind of when we're talking about Millennium backstory, one of kind of the few actually interesting parts of the series comes up. We hear the Major, and the Major basically says that how someone becomes a true vampire other than being bitten is in a time of immense stress and tragedy. They're offered the opportunity to drink in the blood of their homeland and to become a true monster. So, so the Major was defending Berlin when the Soviets were invading, and all of his fellow soldiers had died, and he had been shot repeatedly. And as all of this was happening, the blood of his comrades came towards him, and he was given the opportunity to drink in the blood of his homeland, much like Alucard was given back when he was Vlad the Impaler and the Turks massacred his men. However, the Major refused it. And he refused it because Nazi ideology and Nietzsche and kind of all that places the most important aspect of existence and kind of what all of life is based on is will. The will to power, the idea of Nietzsche and to a certain extent postmodernism, which followed in his footstep, is whoever has the most will can change reality as they see fit. They can impose their reality on others, and the Major believes that only humans possess true will, and that if he becomes a monster, if he becomes a vampire, he will lose his human will. And he believes extremely strongly, despite being evil, that he must guard the purity of his soul. So he will not engage in becoming a vampire or werewolf or anything like that. He instead becomes a cyborg, which will still be being fully human, but being able to continue living long past his lifespan, when his lifespan should have expired. So that's kind of one of the few interesting aspects. That's kind of where the interesting side of the Major's character ends. And other than that, he's just kind of cartoonishly and affably evil and wants to destroy London in revenge for World War II, even though he should probably want to destroy Moscow because that was the more traumatic incident in his life when the Russians invaded. But this doesn't take place during doesn't take place in Russia, so we're just going to ignore that. So the Nazis have like the Graf Zeppelin, and they have like an aircraft carrier, and they fly in and they attack Britain. And for some reason, and people have tried to make up excuses for this, the British Army suddenly doesn't exist, and the British Army can't shoot down a large, slow-moving Zeppelin, which pretty much any fighter aircraft could do very easily, but they can't for some reason. So they attack London and they start burning it down, and because the British Army doesn't exist, they make no attempt to do anything about it. So as this is happening, the Vatican calls a crusade, and crusaders show up, and they start killing the vampires, because the Nazis use an army of artificial vampires, but they also start killing the British because they want to retake Britain for Catholicism. How they think they're going to like conquer and occupy Britain when they have like 1,200 guys, I don't know. The excuse is that Enrico Maxwell is insane, but it doesn't make any sense. Like, him being insane doesn't explain the complete lack of logic involved with his position. Like, I just don't get it. So he thinks that if he if he goes to England and he kills a bunch of people in London, that'll make England a Catholic country again somehow. And they seem to regard Protestants as being worse than vampires. Okay, I don't really get it. So as this goes on, we're treated to kind of a montage of just people having one-on-one duels. So Alucard has a duel with Paladin Anderson, who in one of the few kind of genuinely touching moments in the series, Anderson goes on a rant about, well, goes on a speech about how he doesn't like his humanity, he doesn't like having free will. All he ever wished was to serve God unconditionally. And he wishes that he could have been born a hurricane or a meteorite to punish people in God's name. So they gave him the nail of Helena, which is one of the nails used to pin Christ to the cross, and he stabs himself in the heart with it. And it gives him these really cool plant powers, so he's able to just use thorns and roses and stuff. So we actually get a real rival for Alucard. However, as he's about to kill Alucard, Alucard's fledgling Ceres just steps in a plot device and saves Alucard. And then Alucard just pulls out the thorn, and Anderson dies, giving another one of like the series' few actually good speeches, where he talks about how Alucard became a monster so he wouldn't have to cry anymore, and that human beings become monsters because all the tears within them are used up and they want to become empty so they don't have to feel the pain anymore. So then it turns out that this whole time Paladin Anderson was actually, I don't know, that Walter the butler was actually evil and he was actually working for Millennium. Why? I don't know if it's ever adequately explained. The reason that most people seem to think is that Alucard, no, not Alucard, that Walter didn't want to become old, and he wanted to stay young so he wouldn't become useless anymore. Okay, so that kind of makes sense to me, I guess. So he doesn't want to become useless. So because of that, he becomes an artificial vampire, and thus he basically becomes immortal. Now, the problem with that is the operation they do on him is like this hack job operation. And this hack job operation means like he's only able to be a vampire for 6 hours, and then his body will fall apart. Now, if his primary concern was to become immortal and to regain his youth, why he would undergo a hack job operation that shortened his lifespan, I don't know. It doesn't really make any sense. He claims that he wasn't brainwashed, but Walter being brainwashed, like they captured him, put a chip in his head, and mind controlled him, is the only way this could make sense. So Alucard and Walter fight, and Walter basically dies in a plot device, so Alucard can't lose. And then Ceres goes to fight the captain, who's a werewolf, who's probably the strongest character in the series, but because Alucard can have no rival, he dies in another plot device. And that's pretty much Hellsing. I've gone over pretty much the entire plot. Half the series is a damn climax. Alucard just curb stomps everything in his path to the point that there's absolutely no dramatic tension. And yeah, so that's Hellsing. Now, is Hellsing bad? I wouldn't necessarily say it's bad. There are a lot of immensely good aspects to the show. Firstly, the character design, the costume design, the gun design, the aesthetics are absolutely amazing. The fight scenes were revolutionary, and they really, I think, influenced a lot of anime and video games with just how over the top and crazy they are. The fact that people use so much imagery from it in avatars and in other cases, I think speaks a lot to it. The guy who did it is certainly a really talented artist, and I do have a lot of respect for him as a um, for his ability to do aesthetics and fight scenes, even if I kind of have mixed feelings about his ability to write stories. So I do think there is a lot of good aspects to Hellsing, a lot of kind of laudable aspects to it. But overall, it's an extremely flawed series that suffers from an illogical, poorly developed storyline that's frankly over too. It's either over too fast or just has too little build up to a climax. We don't have enough time to get to know these characters before they get killed off. And those are kind of the things that I think are good about Hellsing. Those are the things I think are bad about Hellsing. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys later.